exploited, harassed, unjust treated, enslaved, or in other terms, used and abused. These were the inhumane activities that were done to a woman who lived in the eastern side of South Africa in the late 1700s. This woman was reduced to being an animal attraction and would furthermore lose her dignity due to colonial oppression and ended up being locked with animals. However, if you think that was the worst, then you are mistaken. So who was the woman? What was her life like? In this video, we will take you on an intriguing journey of Sara Baartman, the woman whose story is regarded as the epitome of racist colonial exploitation. Sara Baartman was born in the Khoikhoi family in 1789 in the Kamdiboo Valley, in what is now known as the Eastern Cape of South Africa. Saartjie is the diminutive form of Sarah, and in the Cape Dutch, the use of the diminutive form commonly indicated familiarity or contempt. However, to this date, her birth name is unknown. Sara belonged to the Ghana Kui subgroup of the Khoikhoi tribe. The Khoikhoi was known as an indigenous group that herded cattle in the region. However, at the beginning of the colonial power, this form of life was taken away from them, and her parents ended up becoming slaves working on a colonial farm. Unfortunately, her mom passed away when she was an infant. Sara Baartman was known to be a hard-working and independent girl in her childhood. Sadly, as she was a teenager, her father was killed by the Bushmen while working as a cattle driver. So who are the Bushmen? The Bushmen are the oldest inhabitants in southern Africa. To this day, they live as hunters and gatherers. Sara Baartman would later get married to a Khoikhoi man who worked as a drummer, and it didn't take long before Sara gave birth to a child. Her woes continued as she lost her baby not long after being born. Sara went through puberty rites and kept her mother's tortoiseshell necklace. In the 1790s, a free black trader named Peter Caesar met her and encouraged her to move to Cape Town, which was just recently under the control of the British. Although the records state that she was persuaded, given the situation at the time, it looked like Sara was forced. For 2 years, she worked as a nursemaid to Peter and a servant to the Dutchman. In the Cape Town, she would be renamed Sarkai by her new Dutch masters. In Dutch, the small details in changing her name demonstrate the amount of control they had over these people. They considered these people inferior. Sara Baartman lived in poor conditions while working in Cape Town and was similarly treated to others who were enslaved. Later, the colonialists murdered her husband, adding more wounds to her troubled life. Following this, she worked in the house of Hendrik Caesar, Peter's brother. The house where she worked was located just outside the region of Cape Town, today known as Woodstock. Sara worked as a wet nurse, a job that consisted of breastfeeding the child of another. This was done by extremely poor women while working for the Caesars. Sara developed a relationship with a humble Dutch soldier named Hendrik van Zog, who lived near Cape Town. However, it came to a sad end, as Zong's regiment left the city, causing even more heartbreak. She continued to work as a servant and a wet nurse until one day she met a Scottish military surgeon named William Dunlop. William Dunlop would supply the British showman with a rare species of animals. After Sara caught his eye, Dunlop presented her with an offer to earn money in England. The offer was that Sara would exhibit her body in the circus in exchange for money. But the question is, what was special about Sara's body that made Dunlop hand such an offer? Sara had a condition that resulted in her having massive buttocks caused by built-up fat. Dunlop saw a huge way of how he would make money since in the 19th century in Britain, the crowd became allured by bizarre and exciting stuff. Sara Baartman refused at first. However, Dunlop remained hesitant in the hope that she would accept his offer since her display would make him a wealthy man. Nevertheless, it was a hard decision for Sara since in the end, she would be exposing herself. With much thought and consideration, she decided to go with one condition, which was that Hendrik Caesar joined her. Hendrik refused at first, but later agreed with the decision. This decision was in large part because of the humongous debts he had from his bad administration on the loans he had taken out. Moreover, he was not getting paid by clients, so in his mind, he had to look for other ways to generate money. On October 29, 1810, Sara signed a contract in which she agreed to work as a servant as well as present herself for entertainment purposes. Unfortunately, Sara had been used. The reason was that Sara was illiterate and the contract was in English, so she was unable to read the contract. However, it was more likely that she was forced to sign the contract, since how can she sign a contract that can't be read? It is totally bizarre if you think of it. Dr. Gordon Chippenbree firmly disagreed. I don't believe there was a negotiation, and that Baartman signed anything or agreed to anything, she said. She further said, No, it was like tomorrow you're getting on the ship. We're packing you up and you're off. Sara became an indentured servant. This meant that the two men had the intention of exploiting her. The men had the power to modify the contract to their advantage, allowing them some sort of protection if any legal problems arose. To solidify their plan, they gave no copy of the contract to Sara. The contract was false, and Sara remained enslaved for life. She was known as the Hottentot Venus. Although Sara was exploited and treated badly, she had two benefits: a hoop in her contract. The two benefits in the contract stipulated that after 5 years of working with the men, she would be able to return to South Africa while also receiving a piece of the earnings from the shower. In the winter of 1810, the party traveled to London. Whether Sara traveled under her own free will is unsure. However, this time, she really didn't have a choice. When they arrived in November 1810, Dunlop already had things set and prepared. Sara would then be exhibited as soon as possible. The show happened in the Egyptian Hall of the Piccadilly Circus. In the circus, there was a show in which Sara, who had little clothes, was being locked in a 1.5-meter cage, with William bringing her to the stage and Hendrik being the head of the ceremony. For a charge of 2 shillings, the crowd would enter to watch Sara Baartman. During the show, Baartman would sing, walk, and display the anomalies of her body. The saddening part was that the people would poke and prod at Sara. Wealthy individuals would pay a special fee for private shows at their houses. It's inhumane. You don't have to treat another human being that way. Chief Tybo says. The flyers for the show read, Sir Archie is 22 years old, is 4 feet 10 inches in height, and has a good capacity. She lived in the occupation of a cook at the Cape of a Good Hope. Her country is situated not less than 600 miles from the Cape, the inhabitants of which are rich in cattle and sell them for barter for a mere trifle. A bottle of brandy or a small roll of tobacco will purchase several sheep. Their principal trade is in cattle skins or tallow. Beyond this nation is another small stature, very subtle and fierce. The Dutch could not bring them under subjection, and shot them whenever they found them. The African Association heard about the ill treatment Sara was receiving and decided to take matters to a court of law. One of the main people behind the campaign was Zachary Macaulay, a highly influential man in the anti-slavery movement that led in the 1807 Trade Act in England. Zachary was also founder of London University. The trial took place on November 24, 1810. The main purpose was to determine whether Sara was exhibited with her own consent. Despite numerous pieces of evidence presented in court, Sara stated she was not under restraint, that she was not sexually abused, and that she came to London of her own free will. Furthermore, the presentation of a contract signed by Sara helped their case, and in the end, the case was dismissed. This meant William Dunlop and Hendrik Caesar ended up with no charges. Sara's contract was amended either way, and as a result, Sara was entitled to more profit for her shows and normal living conditions. The trial made her shows even more popular. She traveled all over Britain and even as far as Ireland. In Manchester, she was even baptized. In 1814, William Dunlop passed away. After Dunlop's death, a man named Henry Taylor brought Sara to Paris, France. Henry had been hearing about Sara's shows in England as news spread fast in Europe. Henry thought that the French people could not miss the opportunity to enjoy the celebrity. Sara became involved with French society. However, despite all this, Sara was sold to S. Rail, an animal trainer who was known in France for being the founder and professor of comparative anatomy at the Museum of Natural History. In Paris, things got worse, as she was exhibited as if she was a circus animal. She was locked in cages next to baby rhinos. During the shows, Sara was presented almost naked without any consideration of her dignity whatsoever. She was forced into prostitution and became a heavy drinker. This time, Sara was enslaved, exploited, and mistreated to an even greater extent than in England. Despite numerous offers, Sara refused to be presented naked. She always insisted on wearing a small apron-like garment. One time, she was exhibited fully naked, and she felt guilty as she knew this was beneath her dignity level. Her body attracted many scientists. They wanted to study her. She stayed in France for 15 months, living in terrible conditions. She was miserable and extremely poor. To add insult to injury, S. Rail allowed patrons to misuse her. She was even sexually abused and got impregnated. The son was named Oko Rail, but suddenly he died at the age of 5 to an unknown cause. After a long travel and inhumane treatment, Sara passed away on December 29, 1815. The cause of her death is still a debate. One source stated that it was inflammation, while another stated that she could have died from alcoholism, pneumonia, or syphilis. George Cuvier, went further and dissected her body to try to discover the cause of her death. Cuvier concluded by saying that Sara was the link between animals and humans, thus the main agenda of Cuvier was trying to prove the scientific supremacy of white men. He also went on to preserve part of Sara's corpse. Sara was considered an intelligent woman, as she could speak Dutch fluently and hold a conversation in both French and English. Not even her death could put an end to the abuse she endured in life. She was displayed in the museum till August 2002, where her remains were laid to rest in South Africa. An 8-year wait since it took the president's lobbying and the fight of her people to finally lay her to rest. She was buried in the Eastern Cape Province, her home area. Sara endured horrific injustice in her life, and centuries on, they have not been forgotten. Sara Baartman is remembered and honored as a woman who became an icon not only for the Khoikhoi people, but for all women who know oppression and discrimination in their lives. She has come to be seen as the epitome of the colonial exploitation of Black people. Several books have been published about the treatment and cultural significance. She became the landscape upon which multiple narratives of exploitation and suffering within Black womanhood have been enacted. Thanks for watching the video. What shocked you the most? Let us know in the comments below. Remember to hit the like button and don't forget to subscribe on your way out.